My friends, thanks for joining. 6 month break was enough. Now it's time to kick off again the channel. I'm happy with the content. What's my preference is about content and trying to explain gaps. I decided to restart again. I will with this video. I will follow up also the syllabus and the course where I stopped it before, but I want to do something a bit unique. I want you to think to be somebody that followed the guideline, you did properly ISO, PCI, you look at all sys hardening, and you are solid. I want you to think on this video. I'll tell you by experience what is missed most of the time. So to give you an heads up on where to focus. And to do that, I will use a Mitre attack matrix, and we will go through each. I need to fly because you know how big it is. And so let me kick off, start and go. But if you have any question or any topic that you want me to deep dive, just drop a message and I will follow up. Okay, reconnaissance. Everybody told you to look at what is your footprint. Any course is telling you all resources where to look, what got indexed. I don't want to do advertisement of nothing, but we all know the main one. But not many are telling you to look into how you registered your networks. If your networks are recorded with your name, is becoming a good yellow page. Another issue in reconnaissance that not many are talking about is subject alternative name into the certificates. You find people listing there using the same certificate for staging or other stuff, and you find a lot of things. That is another problem. Another issue is single sign-on. He's pointing to something like in DFS, you already spotted where it is and where to focus. VPN endpoint are well known to be indexed and we all know, but not many tell you that some vendors are having wrong guidelines on how to implement things in the MZ. And most for laziness don't break the SSL with a load balancer in front, terminating at the load balancer. It's true, if you have an application 0-day kind of payload, you pass through in any case, and so it's not a panacea. But from a network perspective, obviously it's not the point to have a direct SSL with you. It's way trickier to get access from a network perspective. I have to apologize. My editing is not great. I will do better, and my sounds isn't as well. Today is windy. I try to find the better setup, but please focus on the content. So all this stuff, it's not generally a well-known problem, but also CDN-wise or cloud-wise, you could think that cloud save you. In cloud, most of the application get provisioned with under somebody else third level domain. Those are indexed way quicker than any other in the search engines too. And CDN fronting is another big issue because it's caching stuff, and whatever is cached is searchable too. A lot of Google Doc thinks, but not many thinking about their own cache, what they cache and what is available into the cache. We can discuss also about the attack on that, but let's be honest, in the reconnaissance, the focus is always close whatever you can. Yeah, but you need to expose at a certain stage some services. It's how you expose. And if you look at the documentation on VoIP, for example, you find a lot of things that are not properly exposed, and they are too directly exposed. So look at that also from a supply chain attack in reconnaissance. You need also to find people other companies to attack, to leverage, to be sure. But API is another big issue because in reconnaissance, everybody talk about web app, but not about mobile app. If I do reverse engineer the mobile application, downloading, for example, an APK, I do see a lot into the APK. You can also get the token, start to poke and do other games, but it is a reconnaissance too. You see the code, if it's not obfuscated, then you learn a lot about how you work. Most of the application are now platform based, and if you use staging with sloppier control, sometimes staging is actually a good source for reconnaissance too. So these one are overlooked problems. I could have been sneaky and do one video for each and talk more about it, but I want to go on them all. Resource development, pipeline security is seen from a code perspective, not from which type of access the pipeline itself does have. Don't forget that if a pipeline is compromised, the pipeline does have a favorite access into resources. Automation layer, even in security like SOAR, are fantastic for attacks too. And so resource development is not only web app, it can be information security too. Don't forget that. Token management is a big issue everywhere, especially in the pipeline. You can go through ID plugin, SAST, DAST, RASP. You have done everything fantastically, but you find some permanent token there, some access that never rotate, and you compromise that. You leverage a really fantastic entry point because pipeline is really verbose, and from a SOC perspective, it's not mature visibility into the pipeline. In most companies, the two departments are not really working in team, and you'll find a lot of pipeline that gets secured with one-off consultancy, but not thinking in this way. How do I explore that to actually serve me as automation? And obtain uh, let me check if I forgot. Compromise accounts. As I told you, consider token as accounts too. But another big issue that nobody talk about is that authentication is so focused on the attack pattern that are going through the stages of the authentication authorization, and everybody talk a lot about MFA. But if I steal the session as it's happening right now in a lot of these platform as a service, as malware, I mean, you bypass everything. And vendor itself that need to sell you something, it will overlook that. You'll challenge them and they will not have even an answer to and the protection to that. Session cookies are absolutely a nightmare from if you think from an usability perspective. So everybody tend to tell you, give the longer lifespan to that because usability will be impacted. Apologize once again for the wind. Sorry about that. Think that the session when get compromised will probably not expired, and you do have a problem with dual factor authentication too. If you don't have a cloud proxy, you can't enforce, for example, to not look at the cookie, and the MFA will pass anyway. So that is what I'm suggesting you. Look into these things with a different mentality. Vendors are not always designing with security architecture in mind. Don't think because the vendor told you how to configure, you are safe at all. Initial access, that is a long one because you can go about the hardware, but we do have so many low-level vulnerability in Intel and AMD that actually we are not thinking of a full picture. But sometimes initial access is seen as something that will be spotted because you do have a plethora of controls. But the truth is that you could have been overlooking something. Phishing. Is your domain spoofable? Did you configure everything in your zone file in a proper manner with SPF, DKIM, and all other stuff? You need to look into that. You need to think that whatever settings, whatever SaaS service you use, the configuration is on you from a shared responsibility model. And they play on that because some services are not hardened and are multi-tenant services, like exposure of services like mail services, POP, EMAP, and whatever. You need to think which controls you have. Don't forget that supply chain compromise. It's cool, but you need to know what is your mapping. If you do have a website downloading a plethora of marketing tools and you don't have CSP enforced, you miss the enforcement, but you miss also the mapping. You need to know what is your supply chain. API are a big topic and we stress about it a lot. If you have an API gateway, considering that you don't expose the API endpoint, you also have a good control on what is connected to and what is talking to each other as a services. You need to have that mapping if you want to know. Exploiting a public-facing application. You, there are various exploits at different ISO layer, but let's say that most of the vendor want to have this reverse proxy easiest when they can. And they play sneaky because they let you expose directly the endpoint in the MZ. The game is always look where is the SSL and shake. If it's the SSL and shake on a load balancer, you can still compromise the load balancer. If it's application vulnerability will pass through load balancer or not load balancer, but from a network perspective, it will be less exposed the application. A lot talk about load balancing as an out of fashion kind of things. It's not, and it's a good layer of security. The problem is that they don't understand which security function it does have a load balancer. And in most organizations was always an infrastructure things and not many talking about load balancer if not integrating the WAF. Too many security people forgetting this configuration because you can configure a load balancer in a million ways. It can be a layer 3, layer 4 forwarder and do absolutely nothing. It can be your best friends or a big pain. So that is another problem that you should think of. External remote services, a lot are having access to each other networks. Jump hosts and other things are seen as a panacea, and after they get implemented, they are not looked after. Compromise a jump host is in a fantastic place where to hide. There is a lot of traffic, not many auditing stuff, so those are overlooking layer. You could think that I'm talking too much about on-prem and not enough about cloud. Let's say that cloud on that space is exposing sometimes way more than on-prem. First of all, from an information gathering perspective, when you're discovering which cloud is, you know whatever service it can use. So the information gathering phase is really short. Secondary, you do know which gap are having and how things are probably configured. Problem that in a not homogeneous stack like in on-prem where you have multiple vendors, you are not so specific on explaining how your setup is done. VPC is quite flat. In cloud terms. There is not much double op configuration. So that is another big problem. Now, you could have been losing some of the point that I'm trying to make, but is just to say that pipeline access, like I said, and API management, Query API, GraphQL API are really, really well exposed in cloud. And you don't have CVE at all. You could have been vulnerable to something that you'll never be aware of. That is what the industry is not focusing on, and that's wrong because the fact that we don't have CV and mandatory disclosure of which, from an incident response, you could not be always aware of which problem you do have, and even when it's patched, you don't know, and you don't have a timeline for investigation. It's food for thought, but in the initial access, this one is a big problem. You get a cloud service and you don't know what was vulnerable about. And think that sometimes, not right now, bug bounty program and whatever are becoming a big source of information too. And if you read the cloud vulnerabilities on bug bounties, they always have a sort of race time condition. I mean, sometimes they get published and the vendor is okay with that, but sometimes it's not okay with that and get disclosed. Persistence. Okay, let's talk about execution a bit better. You get into an host, you want to execute stuff. Scripting like PowerShell is still a problem. Not due to the PowerShell itself, it's due to the fact that it is missed by default the hardening of that. So you have a way to limit that, but not much out of the box hardening of that. Same things with a lot of execution that are starting to become popular, like WebAssembly. Whatever right now, whatever language can be compiled in WebAssembly, and whatever it doesn't get seen by most of the security controls. You do use Rust, you recompile, and all the time it's changing. And so a lot of people is still thinking all days that can adopt the same security control than before. It's not true. ADR can be good, but on itself don't work too well into the security of the within the browser. Keylogger, magic card kind of stuff. ADR or not ADR, it will not always work. Some don't have proxy capabilities integrated. That is another big problem. Persistence. Let's move on to persistence. Where do you persist? That is a sneaky question. Where do you hide yourself? You don't want to make noise, but let's be honest. If you want to look into a company, what you are looking for, data. SMB, it's a fantastic way. Persist into a print server, it's unbelievably good. First of all, ADR are not always installed in there. You do have favorite access to everything is in there. You do move through shares. You do lateral move without actually doing lateral move. Now tell me how many are talking about that. Yeah, sometimes get popular as a topic based on the Samba vulnerability. There is one actually last week got out that is quite nasty because you can get domain admin. But too much of enterprise world is still based on that kind of problem. A lot of exotic embedding stuff, Ubuntu based, not actually configured properly or updated. Uh, see, you find a lot of IoT that is out there installed in in the hidden space. IoT should be easier to be behind an IoT gateway, but how many are actually doing that? Everybody talk about it, but not everybody implement it. Persistence, it's good into web services. Backdoor into DMZ are fantastic. NGIX, load balancer, are those layers that actually pass through the firewall, and there is a fantastic way to be hidden. VPN as well. If you hide yourself into a VPN endpoint, you have actually visibility of everything. And considering that most are having split tunnel, fantastic way to compromise who get in. That is a problem that not everybody talk about. Jump servers configure left there, as I told you, another big place where to have persistence. Database. Database are always online. Get the persistence to a database. It's most of the time going because nobody want to touch a database, you know. If it doesn't work, it's a mess. So the controls on the database itself are sloppy from a sysadmin control perspective. File integrity monitor are out of fashion, it looks like. I don't know why, because it should be enhanced. That is another way how persistent works, but nobody tell you that. I told you about a lot of dumb things, browser extension at the end of the day are actually using all those components. Accounts, you know, Active Directory, path attack, and all other stuff. Many talk and explain the attack pattern and IAM, so I will not be the best one to tell you how to look into that. But all this persistence is due to authentication as well. But the authentication get bypassed by the session. Remember about that. And so how long your session list can be also the time of your persistence from an attacker perspective, from defensive perspective. External remote services. Uh, I mean, we had a lot of remote service that got out of fashion, TeamViewer or other stuff. There is still a lot of legacy, but in cloud, how do you access to stuff? If you find the management access and you compromise an admin, you actually have a lot of exposure of the on-prem or of a cloud from an admin perspective into stack. And how it's designed is quite common and standard. So think that persistence can be also on an admin box and that compromise your cloud. And that's spooky, not just from an IAM perspective. Event triggered execution is sneaky. The bomb, the time bomb, internal threat conversation is quite long one. Everybody talk about the process when employee leave and whatever, but nobody talk about accounts that get still available because people in is at the time that is actually not at work. And so he's still employee, but he's not at work. You need to think about that because it's key to suspend those long-term leave into the company. If you look into the persistence, we saw many network attack storage that get attacked. Those are fantastic for persistence too. They do have firmware that is not actually monitored most of the time. Find it 0 day and stay hidden in one of those. It's fantastic. Backup service. You get access to a cloud service. You have persistence and nobody will know because it's on a third party. You get fresh data all the time. That is something that the industry is overlooking as well. All these SaaS service about backup are actually monitored, but nobody keep persistence in there. Let's say that if you look into the persistent topic, backdoor are okay, but the way how you keep persistence is getting modified over and over. Uh, the attacker does use a lot of tools that are modules. So the problem from an incident response perspective is before an attacker was having a kill chain well defined, but right now is using tools that are modular. So each time is loading a different extension, a different module against something that is specific to your environment. Persistent is not always done on file system, it's done in memory too. And there you have another gap of the industry. You do find a lot of tools that don't focus on continuous forensics on the memory space. Memory is the best place where to stay hidden, and you don't reboot servers so often. So, as another problem, because all investment goes on the defensive side but not on the analysis. Everybody tell you that attackers stay hidden, and so why you don't spend more in forensics? That is the area where you actually get aware of an attacker because he's actually spotting when he got in, when you started to have an anomalies. But even if forensics is actually having a lot of open source footprint, you find a lot of good tools in open source. It's not so pushed. And if you want to spot persistence, I tell you, forensics is the good way. If it's session DOM related, it's not something that you'll find. But let's talk. You need to push more investment in forensic space. Now, privilege escalation. Oh my God, that is another topic for hours and hours. What to say from an infrastructure perspective, the privilege escalation is IAM based most of the time. And so those attack pattern that I told you on escalation of a privilege, but process injection is something that is seen as ADR is looking into that. Not always. Process injection, if are in a process that doesn't get monitored, they will never be seen. You have always multi-thread in processes. If you look at pipeline and if you think of privilege escalation, if you if you have a playbook that get triggered, access to a system and execute stuff, if you find the API that trigger that, it will be a fantastic privilege escalation because you execute stuff as a pipeline, not as a system or whatever. That is another problem that we are not fixing in the DevOps. Abuse elevation control mechanism and asset token manipulation. That is another topic on how you manage everything. Start to use token management in a proper way and you reduce. If you use a one-time token, you'll have a way easier way to track all this stuff. Uh, let's talk about the fact that cache doesn't stay forever. So now defense, I want to speed up a bit because it's becoming a lecture tour here, and I'm scared you get bored. So I'm trying to talk about more things that people don't talk about. But don't forget the standard as well. So I'm supposing that you did the best guideline. So defense evasion, debugger evasion are good as well when you talk about pipelines as too. Uh, execution guardians and canaries in the processes are good topic too. Let's talk about canary token. That is another topic that doesn't get exp explored enough by the community. How many things you could track, opening of documents and whatever. Let's say the defense evasion, suppose that you bypass a WAF, you bypass many other controls, but let's talk about data. The, somebody attacking you want data, and the defense evasion is actually really nasty in data space. So everybody told you limit the access to document. Okay, but if you have read access, you can still read and copy and paste. These are basic, but are defense evasion. In your way of thinking, you gave read rights and you are okay. No, you need to think on what somebody with read can do. The same stuff is with API. You give the right to that API to query some stuff, but it can probably have a new feature, but it does have customer data, queries, and other stuff, and you need to have that control. That defense evasion is always to keep track also of this new functionality that get introduced, and those are defense evasion in a not common way. Attack Mitre doesn't talk about data if not in terms of exfiltration, but you need to think how you gain access to data. That is another problem. Defense evasion is the SMB access that I told you about. You do think on how to protect the protocol, but you don't think that if you have a sloppy access to file share and there is no good access policy, somebody can read documents but he shouldn't for right to know. That is defense evasion as well. Deploy container is a big topic. I'm going to talk for the next 2 hours about it. But file and directory permission modification. Here is big issue also in the defense space. Verbosity of those logs are unbelievable, and you need to think that sooner will rain. Okay, but in any case, you need to focus on that. Let's modify cloud compute infrastructure. Now, if you have a pipeline, it does modify everything, but you know that is the pipeline only doing that. It could be easier to track this one. The problem is we have still hybrid design somehow, where you do have too many layers accessing too many things. Network binary segregation and all other stuff. Problem is right now you have a lot of cloud access express route problem. You find a lot of way of going. Let me talk about something that is quite unusual. Wi-Fi. You have a lot of access controls that are network based, and you think that most of access into industrial whatever is network based, especially in industrial. Now let's think how all these environments converge, and sometimes you'll find that network access like Wi-Fi is the biggest issue. Now let's talk about something a bit more funnier. How many did upgrade Wi-Fi assets in terms of protocol and check the distance of the coverage, or check a lot of that is based also on which protocol they use, but WPA3, how many updated? How many things don't support that? So sometimes we focus on all these attack meter and message that I'm trying to say is think on the layers of infrastructure, not just on techniques. Techniques, as you see, you have many, but if you go through those, you sometimes miss some macro problem infrastructure-wise. So you need to think that everybody tell you that network access is out of fashion, but most of the industrial process are still using that. Most of your segregation is still based on that. Layer 2 or not. Defense evasion is leveraged due to that. So we always talk about defense, but we forget network because perimeter doesn't exist. Okay, you throw away a big component, but you didn't update all area. So you do have ZTA. Okay, if you want an advanced ZTA, you need the authentication of a device, and not always is done in a proper manner. Certificate cloning, it's fantastic way for defense evasion. I found and I tested things where you can export that certificate that is the only defense against rogue devices. Those are all defense evasion, not in the classical terms. So you can argue with me that I'm talking about something that is not really relevant, but in enterprise, it is. How many always VPN are anyway using so guessable way to authenticate? How those certificates are important. Credential access, my God, let's say that token play a big portion of that. If you use an HSM in a proper way, you should be way better. But you have always problem into input capture. Keyloggers are still too easy to be implemented. Not just in DOM, not just there. You need to think uh, on keylogging. You get those jump server. Most are doing keylogging. Compromise that, and you get the keylogger served to you for the last months. People doesn't think about these small things. You do get something that is a keylogger. It will keylog, but that access will be given. You have a lot of service desk kind of things that uh, can be exploited in a way that you shouldn't. So let me pause for a second. I need to move or I get wet. Let's continue, but without the camera because it's way easier. So input capture, all that measure that you implemented can be played against you. That is the point. You have a lot of ADR that are having over your shoulder opportunity support platform. They can do that too. Those can be played against you. Multi-factor authentication interception. Here, Mitre is thinking a lot about that, but not about session protection. And okay, you have network sniffing. Network sniffing where is important, where you are the client and you can have access to an SSL endpoint. So how smart is your SSL termination on your side is important, right? Remote network sniffing through API, it's a bit tricky in cloud, but it could be done potentially. But I don't know many doing that. So still application access token, finally is talking about that. Still web session cookie, another good way. Unsecure credential. Okay, let's say that we have discover and talk about it, but discovery, account discovery, and all other stuff. Net use.
It's so easy. You get to a box, you do a net use, you get all users, and you discover whatever. Uh, Password manager, I want to talk about it. That is another problem in discovery. Get compromise somebody and get access to his password manager that is network related. That is fantastic way. We don't talk too much about the security and integration of those layers because we think it's already a, an announcement. It is, and it's mandatory to have it because it's the only way to do it. But most of these applications are buggy, and you need to think about that too. Usability is playing a big role into that. Many are using integration with a browser, and we see browser like Edge starting finally to have a password on password managers, but other cloud services are in a way API based, and they are a bit sloppy too. So think about that. Cloud service dashboard, it's a good way, but I think if you attack an inventory, it's obviously a problem. But let's say that in security we are overlooking how we secure our own stack. Think about all these cloud services that's coming. How many are opening the firewall for those? And how many are actually using HOP to cloud services for those scanners? Now, let's forget for a second the fact that you do exploit the tool itself. Let's think that anyway the asset inventory of most companies, internally and externally, are cloud-based. You get to those query API because you are having a proper token. You got everything in one shot. And it's also even telling you which vulnerability is having. So we don't speak as industry too much on how we secure our tools. And I do think we have a race condition where a lot of DevOps looked after security because nobody in security was enough skilled into that. So many choices are becoming historical right now. And even if it's new in somehow, it's still old because it doesn't consider some attack pattern. If I do query and if I do look at all these services and if they do use, for example, CDN, these services don't want to get DDoS, and so they do use CDN. How many of those are protected against CDN fronting? Are multi-tenant? Can somebody front and use that to get into your network because you open the firewall? That is another thing that not many talk about. It's food for thought, and that's the reason for that. Remote system discovery, we all know all IoT, camera, and all other stuff. We know virtualization. Mm, Next month, last year, let's say, we got too many vCenter problems, too many. And we need to talk on how we protect that, but we do have problem also on pass for this stuff. Now container security is something that many are missing. So it's another big topic that is overlooked. Lateral move. Okay, lateral move. Let's talk about favorite link to cloud. Express route. Fantastic lateral move. How many you see talking about that? Not many. How many are stressing the fact that you should need the DMZ on both sides? It's not even requested by the vendors. Have a problem SD1. Good lateral move, good orchestration too, good application routing. Nobody talk about the insecurity of SD1. Um, UI tool testing are another good way of doing the lateral move. Sounds funny, but many are having a really privileged access to stuff. And they can access to inner layers. That is another good problem. So we get into techniques that are data from network shared, collection, audio capture, automatic collection, browser session hijacking. I mean, all these techniques are well known. Data from cloud storage, backup. Let's talk about security of blob. You have expensive solution for backup, and you miss the security of that because it's just going into a blob, and the blob is not properly secure. Email collection, other big issue. We need to look at screen capture, video capture, but more than everything, where this stuff is orchestrated from a video perspective. Think about DVR system and all other stuff. The, what is making me thinking and worry is the browser session, as I told you, in multiple stages of this browsing. So now we look at most of these things from a discovery collection, but that exfiltration, how is happening? DNS, most of the time is DNS tunneling. Okay, you have a cloud DNS. Does it protect you from tunneling all the time? It does all your server use a proxy? Those are the questions that are becoming out of fashion but are still really relevant. So food for thought is think still about the infrastructure. From a DNS perspective, cloud service, especially when we provision with third parties stuff, are not so cool. Look into that from a DNS security. Okay? Really glad we had this chat. I hope you enjoyed. It's a long video. I'm aware of that, but don't forget to follow the channel, subscribe if you like the content, and ask questions. I mean, if the power of a platform is that you can actually interact with me directly, so do use it. Okay, thanks. Cheers. Bye bye.